"I'll give you $5, and that's five too many," a man shouted, loud enough to make sure the whole square heard him. "She'll eat my winter stores by the end of March." Laughter rolled through the crowd like a bad wind, sharp and careless, the kind that always found Prudence Whitlock no matter where she stood. The auction block in Cheyenne was slick with old snow and old shame. The rails were built for cattle, for mules, for property that could be measured and claimed. Today, it held a woman. Prudence stood on that platform with her chin lifted and her hands clenched inside threadbare sleeves, trying to keep her body from shaking. Not from the cold alone, from the knowledge that the men below her were not looking at her as a person. They were taking stock, weighing usefulness, making jokes as if she were deaf, as if dignity was something a woman of her size had no right to possess. The auctioneer cleared his throat, eyes darting anywhere but at Prudence. His voice tried for cheer and landed on cruelty. Lot 47, Miss Prudence Whitlock, age 29, educated, literate, trained in nursing and midwifery, strong, sturdy, suited for hard labor, offered to satisfy debts of the late Edmund Whitlock's estate. Starting bid, $50. The words hit like stones. Educated, as if her mind could be reduced to a selling point. Strong back, as if her spine belonged to the highest bidder. 10 years, the creditor's clerk had said earlier in a flat voice, as if a decade of her life could be signed away with a flourish of ink. Prudence had been raised to believe in law and order, in the idea that rules protected the vulnerable. She had believed it even after her brother's gambling had begun swallowing the farm, even after his death left her standing alone in a parlor full of strange men counting her grief in dollars. Now she understood the truth of the frontier in one bitter lesson. If the law could be twisted, it would be, and the ones twisted under it were always the same. A rancher leaned on the fence and squinted up at her with a grin that made her stomach tighten. $20, he called out. "I need somebody to haul water and butcher hogs. She looks like she can lift." Another voice chimed in, oily and amused. $30, if she promises not to sit on my porch steps and crack 'em. More laughter. Prudence stared at the distant line of buildings beyond the crowd. She focused on the pale winter sky, on the idea that she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. Inside, she was breaking anyway, because it wasn't only the money. It was the way they said fat like it meant filthy, like it meant stupid, like it meant she deserved whatever came next. It was the memory of her mother telling her years ago that a woman's worth was not measured by a man's desire, and Prudence wondering if her mother had been wrong simply because the world insisted so loudly. The auctioneer swallowed and tried again, voice thinning. "Come now, gentlemen, she can read, she can keep accounts, she can tend to the sick. A trained midwife is worth far more than—" "50 cents!" someone yelled, and the crowd roared approval. Prudence closed her eyes for one heartbeat. In that darkness, she pictured the small hands of the babies she'd delivered, the way their mothers had cried with relief when she placed new life into trembling arms. She pictured herself freezing in a stranger's barn, working until her hands bled, being reminded every day that she had been purchased. When she opened her eyes, she found the auctioneer's gaze flicking toward her for the first time, and in it she saw something that looked like regret. It didn't matter. Regret wouldn't buy her freedom. And then the air changed. A silence fell so quickly it felt unnatural, as if the square itself had been commanded to hold its breath. Prudence heard hooves somewhere behind the crowd. She heard the creak of leather. She heard a man's voice, deep and calm, cutting through the cold like a blade that did not tremble. $5,000. The auctioneer froze. Heads turned. Men who had been laughing fell quiet, their faces shifting from amusement to disbelief and then to something wary. The crowd parted as a stranger stepped forward. He was tall enough that he seemed to take up more space than a man had any right to. His shoulders were broad beneath a bear fur coat, his hair dark and long, streaked with winter gray. A scar cut down the side of his face like a hard signature, but it was his eyes that held the square captive, a clear, icy blue that didn't ask permission to be obeyed. He didn't look at the auctioneer first. He looked at Prudence, not at her size, not at her dress, not at the spectacle they had made of her, at her. Prudence's breath caught. The world narrowed to that stare, to the steady set of his jaw, to the sense of something immense shifting into motion. The auctioneer found his voice at last. Sir, did you say 5,000? The man didn't blink. I did. Somebody whispered a name like a warning, and it traveled through the crowd in a ripple. Blackthorn. The stranger stepped closer to the platform, boots crunching on snow, and Prudence felt, for the first time all day, not hope exactly, but the sharp edge of possibility. Before the auctioneer could speak again, the man lifted his gaze to the creditor's table. "Write the papers," he said, "and be quick. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. Now, let's get back to the story." When the auctioneer finally struck the block and declared the sale complete, the sound echoed through Cheyenne like a gunshot. "Sold," he said hoarsely. "Indenture rights transferred in full." Prudence Whitlock did not move. For several heartbeats, she stood frozen on the platform, unable to reconcile what she had just heard with what she felt in her body. $5,000. A sum so large it bordered on the unreal. More money than her brother's entire debt. More than the farm had been worth in its best years. Paid for her life. The men in the crowd stared openly now, their earlier cruelty replaced by confusion and something closer to fear. $5,000 was not a joke bid. It was not bravado. It was power. The man who had made the bid stepped closer to the platform, and Prudence became acutely aware of how small the world felt around him. He did not rush. He did not smile. He did not acknowledge the whispers following him like sparks from a fire. Up close, she could see the lines carved into his face, not just by age, but by weather and hard decisions. His hands were large, scarred, steady. A man who had survived by knowing exactly where to place his weight. The auctioneer cleared his throat again. "Sir, I'll need your name for the ledger." "Josiah Blackthorn," the man said. The name moved through the crowd like a chill. Prudence had heard it before. Everyone in Wyoming territory had. Blackthorn, the hunter. Blackthorn, the tracker. A man who brought in fugitives no one else would touch. A man whose name ended arguments and emptied saloons when he walked in. She should have been afraid. Instead, when his eyes met hers again, she felt something dangerously close to calm. "Miss Whitlock," he said quietly, so softly that only she could hear. "I know this is sudden, but you're safe now. I need you to walk with me." The word safe struck her harder than the money. She nodded once, trusting her voice would fail her if she tried to speak. Josiah turned, already holding the folded papers the auctioneer had shoved into his hands, and extended his arm, not as an owner might, but as an escort. Prudence hesitated only a moment before taking it. As they descended from the platform, the crowd parted without a word. No one laughed now. No one dared to make another joke. $5,000 had silenced them in a way compassion never had. Outside the square, a heavy wagon waited. It was reinforced, its wheels wide and strong, built for mountain roads and serious weight. Josiah opened the door and helped Prudence inside with practiced care, never rushing, never making her feel clumsy or observed. When he climbed up beside her and took the reins, the town of Cheyenne was already behind them. Only then did Prudence allow herself to breathe. "I need to understand," she said after several miles of frozen silence. "What happens now?" Josiah guided the wagon steadily along the road, eyes forward. "Now, the papers say I control your indenture, which means I also control its end." She turned toward him, heart hammering. "You're saying—" "I'm saying you're not going to serve 10 years of forced labor," he replied. "You're not going to be owned by anyone, least of all me." Her hands clenched in her lap. "Why?" He did not answer immediately. The horse's breath steamed in the cold air. Snow creaked beneath the wheels. "Because I've seen what happens to women like you," he said at last. "Women the world decides are expendable. I promised myself a long time ago I wouldn't let that happen again if I had the means to stop it." Prudence searched his face. "And the money?" "That was never the point," Josiah said. "The point was to make it undeniable, to make sure no one could contest it. $5,000 ends arguments before they start." She swallowed. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he replied. "You stood on that block with your back straight while men tried to strip you of your humanity. That tells me more than any ledger ever could." Prudence looked down at her hands, at the faint scars from years of work, of care, of tending to others while being forgotten herself. "And what do you want from me?" she asked quietly. Josiah's grip on the reins did not tighten. "Nothing you don't choose. I'm taking you to a place where you can rest, heal, decide what comes next on your own terms." The word "decide" felt almost foreign. As the road climbed toward the mountains, Prudence felt the weight of the town fall away behind her. The auction block, the voices, the laughter. She did not yet know what Josiah Blackthorn truly planned. But for the first time since her brother died, she felt the faint, dangerous beginning of hope. The land began to change within an hour. The wide, wind-scoured plains gave way to rising foothills, their slopes patched with snow and dark pine. The road narrowed, no longer meant for towns or crowds, but for people who understood how to move quietly through the world. Prudence felt the shift in her bones before she understood it with her mind. This was not a road that led back. Josiah drove with the ease of a man who knew every bend and shadow. He spoke little, but his silence was not heavy. It was the kind that made room for breath, for thought. Prudence found herself watching the way his hands held the reins, firm but patient, guiding rather than forcing. By late afternoon, the cold deepened. Josiah stopped near a stand of trees where the wind broke against rock. "We'll camp here," he said. "Horses need rest, and so do you." She nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. The last weeks had been a blur of grief, paperwork, whispered judgments, and fear. Now that nothing pressed in on her, her body began to feel every mile. Josiah worked efficiently, setting a small fire, checking the wagon, making sure the horses were fed and blanketed. When he handed her a thick wool cloak, she hesitated. "I can manage," she said automatically. "I know you can," he replied evenly. "Take it anyway." It was not said with pity. It was said with certainty. She took the cloak. They sat by the fire as dusk settled over the mountains. The flames reflected in the snow, turning the world amber and blue. Josiah poured hot broth from a kettle and handed her a tin cup. Prudence braced herself for comment, for judgment, for the old familiar tightening in her chest. None came. He waited until she finished before pouring himself any. "You don't have to rush," he said. "Food's not something you earn here." The words struck deeper than he could have known. Prudence swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. "Where are you taking me?" she asked softly. "To a valley most folks don't know exists," Josiah said. "Sheltered on all sides. Hard to reach if you don't want to be found. There are women there already, some older, some younger. All of them came broken in one way or another." Prudence looked up sharply. "A camp?" "A community," he corrected. "They govern themselves. I just make sure no one bothers them." "Why you?" she asked. "Why do this at all?" Josiah stared into the fire for a long moment. "Because once I was too late." He did not elaborate, and Prudence did not press him. Some truths asked to be waited for. That night she slept in the wagon, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Josiah slept on the ground nearby, his rifle within reach, his presence steady as the mountains themselves. In the early hours she woke to the sound of wind moving through trees. For the first time in years, fear did not follow her into consciousness, only uncertainty, and beneath it, something fragile and warm. Hope. The next days followed a rhythm that felt almost unreal. They traveled slowly, Josiah never pushing the horses or her. When the road grew rough, he adjusted without complaint. When the cold worsened, he built fires with care. When Prudence tired, they stopped. On the third day, snow began to fall thick and silent, softening the world into something private and hushed. Josiah guided the wagon through a narrow pass, cliffs rising on either side. Then the canyon opened. Prudence caught her breath. Below them lay a wide valley, ringed by forest and stone, untouched by roads or towns. Smoke curled from several cabins, thin and steady. She saw gardens, even in winter, sheltered and deliberate. Fences, order, life. "This is it," Josiah said. "Sanctuary Valley." Prudence felt tears slip down her cheeks without warning. "For the first time," she whispered, "no one is staring." Josiah glanced at her. "They see people here, not spectacles." As they descended into the valley, women emerged from the cabins. They watched without suspicion, without judgment. Some smiled, some simply nodded, as if welcoming her was the most natural thing in the world. The wagon rolled to a stop. Josiah climbed down and held out his hand. "Nothing is expected of you today," he said, "or tomorrow, or ever, unless you choose it." Prudence took his hand and stepped down into the snow. The mountains closed in behind them, quiet and protective. And somewhere deep inside her, something that had been locked away for years began, slowly, to breathe. Morning arrived gently in Sanctuary Valley. Prudence woke to the sound of wind moving through pine needles and the distant lowing of animals. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then the weight of the blankets, the scent of clean wool and wood smoke, and the quiet settled her back into herself. No shouting, no laughter edged with cruelty, no eyes waiting to measure her worth. She sat up slowly. The cabin assigned to her was small but carefully built, its walls thick, the window placed to catch the early light. A solid wooden table stood near the hearth. A wash basin rested on a bench beside neatly folded towels. Someone had placed a vase of dried mountain flowers on the windowsill. The bed did not creak beneath her weight. That alone nearly undid her. When she stepped outside, the valley was already awake. Women moved between cabins, tending animals, carrying baskets, speaking in low, unhurried voices. No one stared. A few nodded politely. One woman smiled and said good morning, as if Prudence had always belonged there. Martha Greaves found her near the lodge. "You slept?" Martha asked. "Yes," Prudence said. "Better than I have in years." "That will happen here," Martha replied. "Your body learns it's safe." Safe. The word felt unfamiliar, like a garment she had not yet grown into. Over the next days, Prudence learned the rhythm of the place. Breakfast was communal, eaten in the lodge when weather allowed. No one rushed. Food was passed, not guarded. If someone wanted more, they took it without apology. Josiah was usually present but never at the head of the table. He ate last more often than not, listening more than speaking. After breakfast, each woman chose her work. Some tended livestock. Others wove cloth, repaired tools, or worked in the kitchens. A few taught the children who lived in the valley. No task was assigned by rank or force. Needs were spoken aloud. Volunteers stepped forward. On the second morning, Martha asked Prudence, "What would you like to do?" Prudence hesitated. Her life had always been defined by what others decided she was fit for. I trained as a nurse," she said finally, "and a midwife." Martha's eyes softened. "Then you're exactly where you're meant to be." Prudence was shown a small room attached to the lodge, stocked with herbs, bandages, and medical texts. Nothing lavish, but everything clean and carefully organized. She ran her fingers over the spines of the books, recognizing titles she had once studied in secret, never believing she would use them again. That afternoon, she treated a young woman's infected cut. The girl watched Prudence with something like awe as the pain eased. "You've got good hands," the girl said. Prudence swallowed. "Thank you." The words followed her long after the girl left. Life in the valley unfolded not with drama, but with steadiness. Prudence helped deliver a goat kid. She stitched torn fabric. She brewed tonics for aching joints. In the evenings, she sat by the fire and read aloud when others asked, her voice steady, gaining strength with each chapter. No one commented on her body, not once. Josiah watched from a distance, careful not to intrude. He mended fences, hunted when supplies ran low, repaired roofs after heavy snow. When he passed Prudence, he greeted her simply. No ownership, no expectation. One evening, as snow fell thick and silent, Prudence struggled with a crate of supplies. Before she could ask, Josiah stepped in, lifting it easily. "Thank you," she said. "You would have managed," he replied, "but you don't have to do everything alone here." The words echoed. She began to notice small things. He always made sure she was warm before tending to himself. He left books by her door, never mentioning them. He asked for her opinion when discussing storage or medicine, and listened as if it mattered. Slowly, something inside her loosened. One night, she found herself laughing. The sound startled her so much she clapped a hand over her mouth. Then she laughed again, louder this time, unafraid. Weeks passed. Winter began to ease its grip. The valley showed signs of green beneath the snow, and with each day Prudence felt less like a guest and more like a woman reclaiming herself. The first real test came quietly. A trader arrived one afternoon, a man unfamiliar with the valley's customs. He stared too long, smirked once, and muttered something under his breath as Prudence passed. Before Prudence could react, Martha's voice cut clean through the air. "We don't speak that way here." The man scoffed. "Just joking." "No," Martha said. "You're being disrespectful. Finish your business and leave." Josiah appeared at her side, silent, immovable. The trader left without another word. Prudence stood frozen, stunned by the simplicity of it. No argument, no justification, just boundaries, held firmly. That night, she wept in her cabin, not from pain, but from the strange grief of realizing how long she had lived without that protection. Spring came slowly. As the snow receded, Prudence helped plant herbs along the southern slope. She knelt in the soil, her hands deep in earth, feeling something ancient and steady rise within her. Josiah passed by and paused. "The valley looks better with your garden." She smiled without thinking. It always had potential. Their eyes met, held for a moment too long. Something shifted. The air between them grew heavier, charged with words neither yet dared speak. Prudence felt it at night, lying awake, her thoughts no longer guarded. She thought of his steadiness, his restraint, the way he looked at her not as a thing to be managed, but as a presence to be respected. She had been desired before, possessed before, used. This was different. This was being seen. One evening, as the fire burned low in the lodge, Prudence found herself alone with him. "You changed this place," Josiah said quietly. "I didn't," she replied. "It was already here." "You gave it something it didn't know it was missing." She studied him. "And what was that?" He hesitated. "Gentleness." The word hung between them. Neither moved closer, neither stepped away. Outside, the valley breathed, alive and watchful. Whatever was growing between them was no longer fear. It was not desperation. It was choice. The first sign that the outside world had not forgotten Prudence came quietly. A letter arrived with a trader who did not stay long. The envelope was creased, the ink smudged from damp, but the name written across the front was unmistakable. Prudence Whitlock. Her hands trembled as she held it. No one in the valley called her by that name anymore. Here she was simply Prudence. She did not open the letter right away. Instead, she carried it back to her cabin, set it on the table, and stared at it as though it might strike her if she turned her back. That evening, she sought out Martha. "Something's come from Cheyenne," Prudence said quietly. Martha did not ask what. She nodded once. "You're not required to read it." "I know," Prudence replied, "but I think I need to." She broke the seal alone. The letter was short, written in a tight, impatient hand. "Miss Whitlock, it has come to my attention that you were unlawfully removed from an indenture agreement legally sanctioned by territorial statute. The payment made at auction does not negate the labor clause attached to your person. You are hereby instructed to return yourself to Cheyenne within 30 days to resolve this matter, or further legal action will be taken. Silas Harding. Harding and Corm. Prudence felt the room tilt. Her person. She folded the letter carefully, as if it were something fragile, and sat for a long time without moving. The valley outside her window looked unchanged. Snowmelt trickled down the slope. Smoke rose from the lodge chimney. Life continued, but the old fear had found a crack. That night she barely slept. by morning, Josiah noticed. You're walking like someone waiting for a blow, he said quietly as they stood near the fence line. Prudence hesitated, then handed him the letter. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. He's lying, Josiah said. That statute was repealed. I made sure of it. Then why does he sound so certain? Prudence asked. Because men like Harding rely on fear more than law, Josiah replied. They assume women will panic, return, submit. Prudence wrapped her arms around herself. I don't want to run again. You're not, Josiah said firmly. Not now, not ever. She studied him. You sound very sure. I am, he said. Then, after a pause, but there's more you should know. He led her to his cabin. Josiah did not invite many people inside. Prudence had never been there before. The space was sparse, functional, a bed, a table, weapons cleaned and stored with care, and on one wall a small collection of folded papers tied with twine. Josiah took them down and set them between them. These are reports, he said, affidavits, statements from women Harding and his associates forced into indenture. Some escaped. Some didn't. Prudence's breath caught. You've been building a case. For years, Josiah said, quietly, without attracting attention. Why not bring it to the law? Because the law often eats its own tail, he replied. Too many judges owed favors. Too many clerks paid to lose documents. He looked at her then. I didn't tell you because this place was meant to be shelter, not a battlefield. But Harding coming after you means he's afraid. And that means we're close. Prudence sank into a chair. You built this valley for women like me, but you've been fighting this fight long before I arrived. Yes, Josiah said, and it's cost me. She looked up. What did it cost you? He was silent for a long moment. My family, he said finally. What little remained of it. She waited. My father was a territorial financier. He invested in rail, land, labor contracts. Indenture schemes like Harding's made him rich. When I turned against that system, I became a liability. He exhaled slowly. They tried to buy my silence first. Then they tried to break me. When neither worked, they erased me. Legally, socially, I let them. It was easier to disappear than to fight alone. And now? Prudence asked. Now I'm not alone, Josiah said. The words settled between them, heavy and intimate. Over the following weeks, tension grew like a low storm. More letters arrived, then rumors, carried by traders, men asking questions along the mountain routes, a sense of being watched. The women noticed. Martha called a meeting. We need to decide how we respond, she said to the gathered group. This valley was built to protect, not provoke. But protection sometimes requires standing firm. Voices rose not in panic, but in resolve. We won't hand her over. They don't own us. If they come, we stand together. Prudence listened, stunned by the strength around her. Women who had once arrived broken now spoke with certainty, with unity. When it was her turn, she stood slowly. I don't want anyone hurt because of me, she said, but I won't go back, not to chains, not to shame. If they want me, they'll have to face all of us. There was no applause, no dramatics, only nods. That night, Prudence sat with Josiah on the porch of the lodge. The sky was clear, stars sharp against the dark. Are you afraid? He asked. Yes, she admitted, but not the way I used to be. What changed? I know my fear doesn't belong to them anymore, she said. It belongs to me, and I decide what I do with it. Josiah studied her, something like pride in his eyes. Days later, the riders came. 12 men, armed, confident, led by Silas Harding himself. They stopped at the narrow entrance to the valley, horses snorting, rifles visible. Harding called out, his voice carrying, "Josiah Blackthorn, you've taken something that doesn't belong to you." Josiah stepped forward alone, hands visible, calm. "She belongs to herself," he replied. Harding laughed. "You think you can rewrite the law from a mountain hideout?" "I think you're counting on laws that no longer exist," Josiah said, "and on women too frightened to stand." Behind him, figures emerged from the tree line, one by one, women armed with rifles, bows, tools, steady, silent. Harding's smile faltered. Prudence stepped forward beside Josiah. "I am not property," she said, her voice clear. "I was never yours to sell." Harding sneered. "You're fat, unfit, unstable. The court will agree." "Then let the court come here," Prudence said. "Let them see what you done." From the ridge above, another voice spoke. "Harding, drop your weapon." A man in a long coat rode into view, badge catching the light. U.S. Marshal. Harding turned, pale. "I've been waiting for you to make a mistake," the marshal continued. "Threatening a protected community on repealed grounds qualifies." The confrontation ended not with gunfire, but with shackles. As Harding was led away, he spat at Prudence's feet. "This isn't over." She met his gaze steadily. "It is for me." That night, the valley held its breath, then exhaled. The danger had passed, but the truth remained. Prudence was no longer hiding, and neither was Josiah. They stood together by the fire as the women around them returned to their cabins. "You didn't flinch," Josiah said quietly. "Neither did you," Prudence replied. Their hands found each other, not in desperation, but in certainty. The world beyond the mountains had tried to reclaim her. It had failed, and something deeper, stronger, had taken its place. The marshal's men rode Harding and his hired guns out of the canyon at dawn, chains clinking softly against the quiet of the valley. Snowmelt ran clear along the rocks, indifferent to human greed. When the last hoofbeat faded, Sanctuary Valley did not cheer. It simply returned to breath. But Josiah knew better than to mistake silence for safety. "They'll try another way," he said that morning, standing with Martha and Prudence near the lodge. "Harding's people won't stop because one plan failed. Men who trade in bodies don't let go easy." Prudence nodded. Her fear had not vanished. It had changed shape. It was sharper now, alert, anchored to purpose. "Then we prepare without becoming what we're fighting?" That became the rule. The days that followed were deliberate, not frantic. Rifles were cleaned and stored where children could not reach them. Lookouts were set along the canyon rim, not to provoke, but to warn. Routes were mapped, signals agreed upon. Every woman knew where to go if trouble returned and who to stand beside if it did. Josiah trained only those who asked. He taught how to hold a weapon steady, how to breathe, how to stop shaking. He taught restraint first. "Force is the last sentence," he said, "not the opening line." Prudence took on a different role. She organized, she documented, she collected affidavits from women willing to speak, dates and names and places written carefully in her precise hand. She prepared medical supplies and contingency plans. She wrote letters to distant contacts the marshal had provided, men and women who believed in law when it was forced into the light. One afternoon, a rider arrived alone at the valley entrance, hands raised. "I've got a message," he called. Josiah stepped forward, Prudence beside him. The rider dismounted slowly and produced a folded paper sealed with red wax. "From the creditors' council," he said. "They say if you surrender the woman, they'll drop all claims and leave this place alone." Prudence felt the old anger flare, clean and hot. She stepped forward before Josiah could speak. "Tell them this," she said evenly. "There is no woman to surrender. There is only a community that refuses to be owned." The rider hesitated, then nodded. "I'll pass it along." He left without incident, but the message was clear. This was no longer about one contract. It was about precedent. That night, Josiah sat alone on his porch, sharpening a blade he hoped not to use. Prudence joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, setting one beside him. "I know," he replied. "That's what scares me." She studied him. "What does?" "That if this turns violent, it won't just be my conscience on the line." She placed a hand over his. "It already isn't. That's why we're careful." The next morning, the world came anyway. A line of riders appeared at the canyon mouth, banners folded but visible, a show of force meant to intimidate rather than attack. Behind them rolled a wagon carrying papers and men in coats too fine for mountain dust. Lawyers. They dismounted, announcing themselves with practiced confidence. "We're here to serve notice," one called. "You are harboring property subject to reclamation." Josiah did not move. "Property law doesn't apply to people." The lawyer smiled thinly. "Then you won't object to a hearing, right here, right now." Prudence stepped forward. "We won't object to the truth." The lawyer unfurled documents, reading aloud statutes half remembered and deliberately misquoted. Prudence listened, then raised her hand. "May I respond?" The lawyer hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly." Prudence spoke clearly, citing dates, repeals, and case law. She named witnesses and produced copies of affidavits. She described the conditions of indenture Harding's company enforced, the threats, the coercion, the illegal extensions. As she spoke, the women of the valley gathered behind her, not armed this time, standing, present. The lawyer's smile faded. "This is irregular," he said. "So was the auction," Prudence replied. "Irregularities end when someone refuses to accept them." A murmur spread among the riders. One man dismounted, then another. The show of force cracked, not from fear, but from doubt. From the ridge, the marshal appeared again, this time with 2 judges traveling under commission. They listened, they read, they asked questions. Hours passed. By late afternoon, the lead judge cleared his throat. "The indenture claims are void. The statutes cited were repealed prior to the auction. Any attempt to reclaim labor would constitute unlawful detention." The lawyer protested weakly. The judge raised a hand. "Enough." The decision was spoken into the cold air, formal and final. Harding's enterprise would be investigated, the sanctuary recognized as a lawful community, any further harassment prosecuted. When the riders left, they did so quietly. Only then did Prudence's knees weaken. Josiah caught her before she fell. "You did it," he said. "We did," she replied. That evening, the valley gathered, not to celebrate, but to mark the moment. Bread was broken, a fire was lit, stories were shared softly. Later, when the others drifted away, Prudence and Josiah stood together at the edge of the meadow. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she said. "You're not," he replied. "You're a woman who stood up. Others will follow because of that." She looked at him, eyes steady. "What happens now?" He took her hand. "Now we live, carefully, honestly. Together, if you still choose it." She did not hesitate. I do. The mountains watched as they stood, not victorious in the way songs remember, but something rarer, unmoved. The valley settled into evening as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, steady lines. The animals were fed. Tools were put away. Children's voices drifted toward sleep. Sanctuary Valley did not mark survival with noise. It marked it with continuity. Prudence stood at the edge of the meadow, the last light of day catching in her hair. The mountains had taken on their deep blue shadow, a quiet wall between this place and everything that had once tried to claim her. Josiah joined her without a word. For a while, they simply watched the sky change. I used to think freedom was running, Prudence said at last, leaving before someone could decide my fate for me. And now? Josiah asked. Now I know it's staying, she said. Staying and refusing to shrink. He nodded. That's harder. Yes, she agreed, but it lasts longer. They walked back toward the lodge, passing cabins where lamps glowed warmly through small windows. Inside one, Martha read aloud to two younger women. In another, someone sang quietly while mending clothes. These were not performances. They were the sounds of people who no longer needed to brace themselves. At the lodge, the fire had been banked low. Prudence added a log, the flames rising gently, obedient to her touch. She sat, letting the warmth ease the tension from her shoulders. Josiah remained standing, hands resting on the back of a chair, as if he were weighing words he had carried for years. I need to say something, he began. Prudence looked up. Then say it. I built this place to protect, he said, to atone. I told myself it was enough to keep danger out. But somewhere along the way, you walked in and the purpose changed. She waited. I don't want to be your shield, he continued. I don't want to stand in front of you like the world is something you can't face. You've proven otherwise. What I want is to stand beside you as your equal, as your partner, if that's something you still want. Prudence rose slowly. She took the space between them with deliberate steps, the kind that come from certainty rather than urgency. For most of my life, she said, every offer came with a price I was expected to pay with my body, my silence, or my obedience. What you're offering is different. She placed her hand over his heart. You're asking, not taking. Yes, Josiah said, always. She smiled, small and real. Then here is my answer. I don't need rescuing. I don't need owning. But I choose you, not because you saved me, but because you see me. Relief crossed his face, unguarded and human. They did not kiss right away. Instead, they stood like that, close, breathing the same warm air, letting the truth settle between them. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, men like Harding still believed the world could be bent to their will. Laws would be written, challenged, rewritten again. Safety would never be absolute. But here, tonight, there was light. Later, Prudence returned to her cabin alone. She lit a single lamp and sat at the small table by the window. From a drawer, she took out a folded paper she had not touched since her arrival. The auction notice, creased and yellowing. She unfolded it once, read the words that had tried to define her, then folded it again and placed it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and disappeared. She watched until nothing remained. When she lay down, the bed held her without complaint. Outside, the valley breathed steadily, like a living thing that had accepted her as its own. Across the meadow, Josiah stood on his porch, looking toward the same darkened sky. For the first time in many years, he was not scanning for threats. He was thinking about mornings. Tomorrow there would be work, gardens to tend, lessons to teach, decisions to make together. Tomorrow, someone new might arrive at the canyon entrance carrying fear and hope in equal measure. And when they did, this place would answer in the only way it knew how, with open ground, with firm boundaries, with the quiet promise that no one here would ever be sold again. The night deepened, calm and watchful, and the question lingered not in doubt, but in possibility. Could something born from violence and loss become a future strong enough to outlast the world that created it? Every time a story like this is told, it carries more than words. It carries the quiet hope of people who were once judged, traded, or dismissed, yet still chose to stand. Prudence was not saved by money. She was not saved by strength alone. She was saved the moment someone looked at her and said, without bargaining or condition, "You matter." If this story reached you tonight, tell me where you are listening from. A small town, a busy city, or a quiet room where these words found you at the right moment. And if you still believe that dignity can be reclaimed, that love can grow where cruelty once ruled, then stay with me. Another story is already waiting.